In this podcast episode, we want to introduce you to our BCEN friend, Merideth Gradowski. Come along as Michael Dexter and Hollye Briggs talk with Merideth about her role within trauma care and her best advice to progress as a new professional. This episode is called Quality Trauma Care, From the City to the Burbs.
Hello, and welcome to the BCEN Friends podcast, where we hold interesting conversations about learning with a range of thought leaders, BCEN certification holders, and industry professionals. But most importantly, to create value and insight for you, our professional nurses across the emergency spectrum. We hope you find our discussions interesting, informative, sometimes funny, sometimes serious, and always valuable. I'm Hollye Briggs, a professional development specialist at BCEN and one of your hosts for today. I'm joined by my co-host, Michael Dexter, Director of Professional Development at BCE. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Hollye.
It's great to have you with us. In this episode of BCEN and Friends, we have Merideth Gradowski. Merideth is an emergency and trauma nurse who's passionate about quality and performance improvement related to trauma care. Obtaining and maintaining the TCRN and CPEN credentials are just two of the ways she's raising the bar for professionalism. Michael, could you please introduce us to our BCEN friend, Merideth?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Merideth Gradowski is the trauma program manager at an American College of Surgeons Verified Level 1 Trauma Center in the Phoenix area in Arizona. She's been a nurse since 2009, with the majority of her experience in emergency and trauma nursing. Her prior roles include ED charge nurse and supervisor, trauma injury prevention coordinator, and trauma performance improvement nurse. She initially obtained her associate's degree in nursing and then furthered her education with a Bachelors of Nursing from Arizona State University and then a Master's of Nursing from Queen's University of Charlotte. Merideth, welcome to the BCEN Friends podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for being here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Before we dive into some questions we have for you, just tell us a little bit more about yourself, your career in nursing, and how you ended up in the trauma role that you're in today.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about the journey this morning, and I thought, wow, it's good to reflect back on your career, because when you don't think about it, you are reminded of all the steps it takes you to get somewhere. So my first degree was in conservation biology. And when I was close to finishing that, I realized, I'm not really sure if there's really a lot of solid jobs out there. And I had already been interested in nursing, and I had done a lot of prerequisites for nursing school. So I went straight from one degree into my associate's degree at community college for nursing. And then I worked for a little bit after that. And then after I had my two children, I went back immediately into my BSN at ASU. And then I just finished my master's in a couple of years ago. So the progression to education was always in my plan, just on a little bit longer timeline than others. And as far as my professional working experience, I was a new grad on a med-surg unit. At the time, I worked in an ER while I went to nursing school, but at that time, the director did not have a fond opinion of new grads starting in the ER, but I was okay with that. So I went to the med-surg unit and then worked there for almost 2 years, and then went back to the ER as a nurse. And I was at a level 1 trauma center, not the one I currently work at, but worked in the ER and level 1 trauma center. And then about a year and a half in, started taking care of our level 1 trauma patients. And so many ERs in the nation kind of do that balancing act where a lot of ER nurses also take care of the trauma patients in the ER. So I did that for a few years and then became a charge nurse. And then I moved over into the trauma administration world, which is where my injury prevention role and my performance improvement role came into play. And then I moved up to the trauma program manager role at a level 1 facility. So that's kind of my career projection since 2009.
And you haven't gone back to take any biology conservation classes and rethought that?
No. I mean, maybe when I'm retired one day, I'll work for some conservation agency. When I went into my undergraduate, I actually did all my prerequisites in nursing. But midway through, I had a change of heart and I thought, oh my gosh, I have this other passion. What should I do? So I went with conservation biology, and I wouldn't say I regret that at all. I just, when I got done, I thought, there's not a lot of, I wouldn't say stability, but there's not a lot of opportunities out there in that field. And I was just thinking about my future. And I had several family friends, and my fiance's aunts were all in the medical field. And I had a lot of people just say, you should do it. It's a great career. You can do so many different things in nursing. So here I am today. And it's true. So many different career paths you can take.
I think it very interesting that you did kind of like an analysis of it. And you said, okay, I have these passions. I have these things that I care about, that I'm concerned about, and kind of where will that lead me in life. And I also like that you haven't said that's never going to be a part of my life again, that, hey, you never know, that might actually bounce back in at some point, and you'll take all of the skills that you've learned along the way and be able to apply them to whatever you put your mind to. So I thought another interesting point of what you just spoke about is when you were coming out of school and you were a new nurse and you kind of wanted to get into emergency side of nursing, but you said, hey, there just wasn't that opportunity because there was this opinion about new nurses in the ER. When I've heard that as well, I know that when I came out of nursing school, there was this opinion that new grads don't really need to start there. They need to start somewhere else and kind of work their way towards critical care. And I do believe that along the way, it really has become more of an individual basis, and looking at that individual nurse and saying, well, where have they done their clinical rotations? Where have they had past experience? Have they teched there? And so just looking at the individual nurse as opposed to saying like no new grads ever, And so I think that maybe there's a lot of wisdom in that approach versus kind of a blanket approach. But when we talked the first time, you had said that your team developed a mentoring program for new hires in the ED and in the trauma departments to really help them understand, provide insight from the trauma improvement side of things, and how just understanding, kind of giving that big picture overview of trauma patient management. Can you tell us some of the details of that and basically just the why behind why this program even came into being?
Yeah, I would say I'm actually quite excited to talk about this. I do have to shout out to the ED leaders that I work with, because this was a collective kind of plan. And I would say it spawned out of exactly what you just said, is that there are some individuals that are going to be ready to start in the ER. And then there's some individuals that it might not be the right fit for them. And so we developed this pathway focusing on a lot of new grads, because in this ED, they do hire new grads, and focusing the pathway on new grad nurses versus new to service. So maybe someone moving from a med surg unit to the ED. So not a new nurse, but new to the ER service, ER and trauma services, and also experienced ED nurses, maybe ones that are coming from another level trauma center have experience with trauma. So we really have a pathway built for those three types of ER nurses. And the pathway is meant to get them thinking about what a level 1 trauma center entails from the moment they start. Because when we didn't have this pathway, I feel like we collectively felt like, as trauma leaders and ER leaders, that maybe some of these nurses are missing some of these items along the way. And it's a good way for them to get to think about how the ER fits into a level 1 trauma center and how a level 1 trauma center status fits into the ER, and get them to understand some of the expectations ahead of time before they are 2 to 3 years in and maybe don't understand why we're asking them to do certain things, or why as a trauma center we need this versus the hospital down the street doesn't request this or need this of their nurses. And that is a very broad kind of explanation, but that's really, we felt a need to have the nurses understand what they're getting into from the get-go.
So in saying that, and understanding what they're getting into, you also are working with the community to educate as well, and looking at injury prevention in the community. And so I wanted to talk about that, because sometimes it feels like the never-ending cycle of, we come to work and we take care of these patients that have had these horrific traumatic injuries, and then the next day we go back and it's a different day, but the same type of injuries over and over. So sometimes I know that can wear on the staff, but based on what you're doing with multiple programs within the facility there, what do you see as some of the bigger needs for community education in your particular area in terms of trauma prevention? And then how are you incorporating those needs early on or explaining those needs early on with this new hire program as well, so that they understand that the work is being done on multiple angles?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when the nurses are part of the pathway, I meet with each nurse individually and explain really what it is to be a trauma center and what are some of the requirements that we have to uphold to be a trauma center. And one of those requirements is that we need to have specific injury prevention programs that we are running out in the community that address our top 2 to 3 mechanisms of injury. So many trauma centers, we are not unique in that our number one mechanism currently is falls. And so a lot of them here in Arizona, we have a high retirement community. So a lot of our falls are from ground level and 65 years and older. A lot of those patients are on blood thinners. And so our predominant programs and the ones that we run, and when I say we, I'm talking about trauma services. We have a full-time injury prevention coordinator here. She's an RN. She's a former trauma ICU RN. She is going out to the community and facilitating fall prevention programs. And so that's our number one mechanism that we try to target in the community. And so I educate the nurses that are on this pathway that, this is what the trauma center is needing to do. It's a requirement for us to go out into the community. And a lot of people don't know that there's this whole division of the trauma center that does a lot of work outside of in the hospital walls. So fall prevention, and then our second mechanism is motor vehicle crashes. Motorcycles are included in that. And then our third mechanism of injury is assaults. So we are still developing what we want to do as far as violence prevention programs, but our main focus is fall prevention, motor vehicle, and just safe driving habits and to mitigate distracted driving. And then we also run Stop the Bleed, which is a very popular program amongst several, hospitals, even though it is not necessarily one of our top mechanisms as far as like penetrating injuries or injuries that are causing external hemorrhage. We still run that program because the American College of Surgeons definitely wants its trauma centers doing Stop the Bleed out in the community. So that is another, very popular demand that we have in the community from a lot of schools.
I like that you have taken not only what's being done by a different department, right? Because injury prevention, as an ER nurse, I didn't really understand what that was when I was new to emergency nursing. I was just like, we do our job, we take care of our patients, we go home. But the further along I got in my career, I realized there's so many moving parts. And if you're not aware of what's being done by another department and how they're actually trying to prevent, how they're trying to mitigate things that will then impact what comes through the door. And then you just realize, gosh, I'm so grateful that this is something that's happening out there in the community. One part I think of professionally developing as an ER nurse was to realize that I actually could play a role in injury prevention and participate and make an impact on the patients that could be coming through the door. But if they're out there, they're getting the education, perhaps they'll make choices and maybe not come through the door as a patient. So I appreciate that. And again, performance improvement, quality of care, really important to trauma centers. Like you said, it's a part of your designation with ACS. For those that are not working in trauma verified or designated centers, what can someone in those facilities do to improve care for trauma patients?
I would say the first place I would go if I did not work at a designated or verified trauma center, any level, I would go to the hospital quality department, or I would ask your department leader. Because here at our center, well, at most centers, but at our center, we work pretty closely with the hospital quality department because trauma quality looks at a lot of the same things that the hospital quality department is looking at, such as DVTs, PEs, ventilator-associated pneumonias, Hollye's, catheter-associated UTIs, what we would call in our world reportable events. Your hospital quality department is going to know what patients those events are happening on. And then they should be able to delineate for you, are these injury patients that these are happening on, patients that come to the hospital with injuries, or are these medical patients? So if you didn't work at a trauma center, that would be where you would get that information. Hospital quality is going to know kind of the pillars of quality for different patient populations.
So we've gone down into the nitty-gritty of performance improvement and talking about a lot of the data that a lot of nurses shy away from or don't want to know. But I wanted to go back to just trauma as a whole because I think people can go into a lot of different areas of trauma care, not just the emergency side, but trauma ICU or performance improvement, community outreach, etc. But on the other side of trauma, there's obviously what happens to the individual, and there's often a lot of terrible things that nurses have to witness in the trauma realm. So balancing out some of the great wins and some of the difficulties, what advice would you give nurses that want to grow up to be a trauma nurse? They say, I want to go into trauma nursing. What advice would you give them on how to be a really good trauma nurse?
My advice would be to find a mentor. I think that's kind of maybe a common piece of advice, but I feel like find someone that's doing something that you want to do or in that world, and see if they will give you a pathway or a guiding light on how they can get to where they want to be. I would say look to someone that's doing something that you want to do. I know that anytime I'm speaking to a newer nurse and they have questions, how can I get here? How can I get here? That would be my same advice to them, is find a mentor. Go talk to somebody that's doing something that you want to do. I would love if more people came to me and said, hey, how'd you get into this world? Because they can learn about how many different pathways to get, in the nitty gritty of trauma, or do nursing trauma care, or anything. Explore your world, I guess, is a better summary of that. Be open to learning new things. Be open to learning challenging things, and take every opportunity that's given to you.
So somebody says, I want to know the Meredith school of thought on how to become a great nurse. You said, be open, be willing to try new things. Any other advice you would give them? Any particular way to focus their studies, or any courses you recommend they take, or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say TNCC and ATCN are great foundational courses. And then when you want to move to that expert level of trauma nursing care, it would definitely look into TCRN certification. I think the TCRN certification gives a really great broad example of what it means to understand the care of a trauma patient and understand what a trauma center is.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And you have multiple certifications, like Hollye mentioned. You have your CPEN as well as your TCRN. You have your master's degree, and you've done a lot. You have a lot to be proud of. And it often takes a lot of different people coming into our lives to get us to where we are. Is there any particular patient or any particular family member, coworker, anybody that really made a huge impact on your career where it is today?
I feel like there's too many to name, but I'm glad you asked this question because I thought about this today. And I would say, and early on in my nursing career, I had a phenomenal ER educator that really shared all the different opportunities that are open to nurses to learn. So I would say my really strong ED educator, and then I myself had a mentor. It wasn't a formal mentorship, but I'm still friends with this nurse today. She's a nurse practitioner, but she really kind of guided me on furthering my career, furthering my education. Now she's trying to get me to get my DNP, and I'm like, slow down. But I would say a really great ED educator kind of set me on my path. And then finding a mentor within my department that I could run things by. What do you think about this? What do you think about this course? What would you do next if you were me and in this position again? And then I'd have to say, like, an extremely supportive family. I have 2 kids, and I would not be able to be this accomplished if I did not have my husband's support and grandparents' support.
It certainly takes a village to get us to where
Sure.
we to where we are today. And I appreciated that when you were reflecting on some of these questions, reflecting on your nursing journey, reflecting on who impacted you, that it really spoke to some of the advice that you gave, being that you said, hey, look for a mentor. And one of the people that you feel like has made one of the greatest impacts on you professionally was someone who mentored you and who challenged you and who helped to maybe guide you in some ways to where you are today. And in looking back, you realize without that advice, without that encouragement, without maybe them issuing a little bit of a challenge, you might not have said yes. You might not have tried to do the things that you've done and accomplish the things that you've accomplished. Sometimes I don't think it's because we don't feel like we're up for the challenge. Sometimes we don't even know it's out there. And having somebody bring that to us and say, no, I think you can do this. I think you were made to do this. And really just, again, taking the time to reflect, I feel like it brings us back to, gosh, I want to do that for somebody. What was done for me, I want to do that for somebody else. So I appreciate you sharing that. And it's one of my favorite questions. I love that question. I love hearing that there are people in our profession who turn around and help the next, right? So thank you for sharing that, Meredith.
Yeah, no problem.
I get the chance to ask a few rapid fire questions, and they're really just some of your favorites, just so we can get to know you a little bit better. So the first one is, if there was a career outside of healthcare that you would like to try, now, knowing that conservation is part of your life as well, so it might be that, but if it was just anything that you'd like to try, what would it be?
I think I'm going to have to go back to conservation biology on this one. I mean, it's always been in the back of my mind. I would probably go into that, to be honest.
Like, what specifically though? Like what, like,
Well, in my first undergrad, I got the wonderful experience. It technically counted as a study abroad, but it wasn't maybe a traditional study abroad. I did go to Mexico and did a lot of field research on sea lions. We took tissue samples and measurements, and that was really, really fun. So, I could go work at a zoo too. So aquariums, that kind of stuff. So, that might be my second career choice, to go back into the conservation biology world.
that sounds fun. It sounds a lot like what I see like on those National Geographics, and you see people following the penguins around or sea
Yeah,
lions or something. That okay. Can't wait to see you on Nat Geo, I'm sure.
I'll let you know. Free passes to the aquarium for you guys.
Hey, I appreciate that. Thank you.
We're there. We're there. Bring our kids. Okay. All right. 3 categories of favorites. And this can be, like all-time favorite, or it can be just something you're currently into. So, favorite book.
Oh, okay. I have been telling a lot of people about this book. It's a duology, and it's a recent book. It's called One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. It's a great, great book. So I'm recommending that to everyone I know.
All right. I have written it down.
Huh?
Thank you, ma'am. All right. Your
So there's
favorite.
no cliffhangers, no giveaways, just this is the book.
Well, I'll give you some details. So it is, I always preface this when I tell people to read it. Technically, it is a fantasy novel, but right now dragons are very popular. There's no dragons involved. It's more about magic than fantasy, but I guess it's probably categorized as a fantasy novel, but it's really great. Really great book. Really creative writing.
I tell you what, sometimes when I read a book, I'm like, somebody thought of this. Like
Mhm.
somebody thought about this and they wrote thousands and thousands of words about it. Wow. I am sometimes very stunned by the creativity that I read in books, which I mean, if that makes me a library nerd, then that is who I am. I embrace it fully. All right. Like I said, wrote it down. I'm always looking for a good book. All right. Favorite movie, TV show, or it can be a binge-worthy series that you'd recommend for us.
My favorite movie is definitely The Burbs. It's from the 80s. It's a Tom Hanks, kind of cult classic. I highly recommend it. It has been my favorite movie since I was a kid. I cannot waver on that one.
you should not. It is a great recommendation. And for those who maybe haven't seen some of Tom Hanks' older movies or like when he had all this hair and everything, yeah, you should check him out. He did, gosh, I'm just thinking back on all the stuff that I saw him in. I'm like, dang, the man has made a lot of films and a lot of good ones along the way. So thank you for that. Great recommendation. Favorite musical artist? Again, it can be just currently something that you're jamming out to, or best of all time.
I can't, I think best of all time, I cannot make that pick, not even for a book. So I'm kind of given current favorites right now. So I am utterly obsessed with this band called Khruangbin. I'll spell it for you. It's Khruangbin. And it's a wild name, but they're from Texas. I think it means airplane in Japanese. Why they chose that name, I don't know. But they are kind of indie, and I am getting ready to see them in concert for the second time. So check them out.
That is awesome. I wrote it down. Thank you.
My obsession for the last couple years.
Thank you for spelling their name.
Yes.
Otherwise, I would be looking up like Japanese airplane, like to Google it. That is awesome. A lot of people recommend artists that I know and songs that I've heard. So I'm always very interested when I'm like, I have no idea. Like now I want to go research it. Now I want to figure out who they are. So you're probably spreading like some new fandom out there. So good.
I hope. I mean, I like it. I like when I discover things in bands or musicians that are not so popular, because you can get into some smaller venues and see them in smaller places. So, but they're getting bigger and bigger. So.
Okay. Well, thank you again. All right. My last question. What is a self-care go-to or like a hobby outside of healthcare that really helps you reset?
I would say travel, or if you don't have the funds or the time to travel, I would say reading. I have really picked up reading for leisure in the last couple years, which I haven't done in a long time. So I've really enjoyed that. And if I'm not at a bookstore picking out books, travel, just getting away from your daily life, having a reset.
I agree on both of those fronts. I think getting outside of your day-to-day, whether that be a really good book that kind of takes you somewhere or going on a trip that takes you somewhere, there's still a lot to learn. And I feel like it kind of brings you back to who you are. So great recommendations all the way across the board. Thank you for all of those, Merideth. If our audience wants to follow you online or on social media platforms, where could they follow you at?
Yeah, I would say I am on LinkedIn, but I also have, formerly Twitter, now X account. It is at Level 1 Trauma RN, and the 1 is numeral 1, not Roman numeral 1. So Level 1 Trauma RN.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And I will post that on this episode blog.
That sounds like a handle that a lot of people would want.
I know. I couldn't believe it was available when I got it a few years ago.
Awesome. Well, thank you for meeting with us today, Merideth, and talking about trauma care. And we so often talk to people about the clinical concepts of care, but I think understanding the entirety of trauma care to include the education involved, the data that is looked at, and ways that people can improve trauma care in their own communities is really important. So thank you for sharing your passion for that with us today, and for all of your great insight and your recommendations as well. We appreciate it.
Yeah, it was super fun. Thank you for having me.
Well, I want to take this time to thank Merideth for joining us for this episode of BCEN and Friends. Thank you, Merideth, for sharing your expertise, your passion, and your insight. Having someone who can take mandated guidelines and translate them into meaningful processes and practices makes a huge difference for every nurse and member of the trauma team. We appreciate all that you're doing to make an impact for trauma patients. And to all of our listeners, we hope you will stay tuned as we continue with BCEN and Friends and bring you new and meaningful content and perspectives. If you have a suggestion for an episode, please email us at bcn@bcn.org. I'm Hollye Briggs, here with Michael Dexter, and on behalf of the entire BCEN team, we thank and celebrate you for all that you're doing as professional nurses across the emergency spectrum. Until next time, we are out.